In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. We are coming to you on a Thursday. Almost said Wednesday there. The days are just getting mixed up at this point. A Thursday following a Grizzlies win, by the way, over the Utah Jazz. A game in which they ran away in the second half, but not before making it a little bit sweaty in the first half. But we've got plenty of talk to talk about this week. We've got injuries to talk about. We've got the state of the West to talk about, the recent games, and a few players that are probably going to have some more opportunity. So, Chris, let's start here. What have you made since we last talked of these games? Obviously, they lost to the Clippers. They, lost 3 in a row and pulled out a win against Utah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of the individual outcomes have necessarily been that surprising. It was disappointing, without Ja Morant, with some of the other problems that they've had. It was disappointing to see them lose at Sacramento, lose at Portland. Sacramento is a team that's in the playoff mix, but has sort of been fading. Portland's a team that is not quite in the playoff mix, but has been playing a lot better. In some ways, maybe the Sacramento loss was worse than the Portland loss. But, and frankly, I'm at the point in the season where, like, if it's not the most recent game, I sort of barely remember it. I just sort of try to refresh my memory.
Yeah.
The Clippers thing is sort of a bad matchup for the Grizzlies. It's weird. Like, they're 6-4 in their last 10. And it doesn't feel that way, like, at all. And part of that was that the 4-game win streak they had that helps them get to that point that was the stretch where they were beating shaky teams by like 1 or 2 points with Ja Morant playing awesome, right? And so that wasn't like a super impressive team basketball. They haven't looked really good as a team for a while. Maybe with the exception of the home game against Miami, on Tony Allen night, where they were great, like, start to finish in that game, but also Miami's been struggling. And so, it's a team that's been shaky. I think they needed a game like the Utah game, not just to get a win, because they may have been looking at a 5-game losing streak with Oklahoma City, on the road coming up next, a team that's 30-5 on their home floor. So you break up what could have been a losing streak. You sort of stabilize yourself a little bit in the playoff race, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Like, nothing's guaranteed, but that was a win that helped stabilize you, especially with teams around you taking some losses. And then the team just played well. Now, it didn't play well in the first quarter. It got down in the first quarter, but then it felt like, their defensive intensity picked up and they played really well, at the end of the first half and then just throughout the second half. That was against a bad team. Like, Utah's bad. But, you didn't beat them by 5 points. You beat them by 40 without Ja Morant, and everyone on the team played well. Mm-hmm. And, I think Vince Williams had a pretty encouraging game. That's another thing we could talk about. Yep. I think the team is shaky right now, but it's the kind of thing where you look around and, like, the Lakers have been kind of shaky, and the Nuggets have been kind of shaky, and the Warriors have been kind of shaky. And the question is going to be, like, who's going to be healthy, when you get to playoff basketball? The Grizzlies, another thing that happened in all this, I'm sort of rambling, but they lost Brandon Clarke, which I think is a big hit. I think that's happened since last time we talked.
Yeah, let's talk some of the injuries. Let's get into some of the injury stuff, because I think that's probably what most people are anticipating this podcast is going to talk about. There is Brandon Clarke, and we should talk about Brandon Clarke, but that's a little bit more extended. I think that there's Ja Morant, and Ja's like the one that feels like I'm getting questions from all directions about what's going on with Ja. Side note.
Well, the team hasn't given any answers, which is kind of frustrating. I would say they've been on this road trip. Neither of us are on the trip. I don't think there's a lot of media out there. So Taylor Jenkins is not getting a lot of questions. I'm still surprised I haven't seen him respond to the Ja thing. But as far as I can tell, he hasn't. He'll have to, on this weekend when they're back in Memphis. But to this point, the team hasn't really addressed it.
So a few things here. Yeah, I think we're probably gonna have him say something about Ja. Taylor Jenkins will say something about Ja tonight. As we record this on Thursday, they're gonna play against the Thunder later tonight. I think we're gonna get something. I
Okay.
anticipate that. I don't think that this is an injury, like based on what I've gathered without them saying anything about it yet. Like I don't think this is like threatening Ja in the playoffs. I don't think we've reached that point. Like maybe it, I think there are questions about whether or not Ja's going to be able, his body's going to be able to hold up over a playoff series. But I'm talking about like being ready to play in a game based on his current injury in game one of the playoffs. Like I don't think that. I think if that were the case, the Grizzlies would have put out an injury report, like a statement, like they did
Right.
on some of these other things, and they haven't done that. So, to me, that suggests that like this is. I mean, obviously they're not giving out a timetable, but that can honestly be a good thing. That could mean he's day to day, right? Versus like them saying, "Well, we're going to look at him a week from now." So, I think that I think with the jaw thing, I understand why there's a lot of panic around it, and I understand why there would be concern about a hamstring over a playoff series. But like, is this something that they're gonna just shut him down? Like I've seen that suggested online a few places, like just shut him down for the year. I don't know. Like I don't think that doesn't seem to me like the vibe I'm getting from that situation. I don't know if you've picked up anything on the
Well,
jaw stuff.
my assumption has been, and again, this is assumption, this is not fact. My assumption has been it's the kind hamstring is the kind of thing that can get worse.
Right.
It's not something that's just necessarily going to get better. So that's the kind of thing you tend to sit down for a bit with. My assumption has been that they are being particularly cautious with it in order to give him a better chance to be 100% or as good as he can be when the playoffs arrive. So my assumption has been that him not playing now is not a sign of not being able to play in the playoffs. It's a sign of taking extra caution in order for him to be able to play in the playoffs. So that's sort of been my operating assumption on that. I don't think like I don't if he should be good to go for playoff basketball, I don't think he'll set until the playoffs. I think he will come back at some point in the regular season if he can come back at all. And my assumption is that he can come back and he will come back. But these are all still assumptions at this point. I just assume it's the kind of thing where you're basically trying to keep him in bubble wrap as much as you can to give him the best chance possible of being his best self when the playoffs come.
Yeah, hopefully we get some clarity from Jenkins tonight, and that gets uh get we get some sort of thing. But yeah, we haven't had anybody on the road like the just inside baseball here. Like I think most of these games this season we've had at least one beat writer on the road for the Grizzlies. But I know like DeMichael with the CA, he's had personal stuff going on, and I had dental procedure done yesterday. So
Right.
like there's been no opportunity for anybody to be on the road, and it comes at pretty inopportune time.
Well, and then and then, and
Because of
then
the
we're all
John
gearing
stuff.
up. We're gearing up to be
Yeah.
on the road for the
Yeah.
playoffs here very soon.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully towards the end of the season, hopefully we have more meaningful games and some sort of playoff seeding race can continue. Okay, on to Brandon Clarke, who we also need to address. Obviously, he's done for the year with a knee sprain. That was incredibly disappointing, and that's an incredibly big blow, obviously, to what the Grizzlies want to do. He's their most versatile defender. He's in the closing lineup. He's been really good at times this year. That one hurts. That one obviously hurts for the Grizzlies. But what was your initial takeaway to the news that Brandon's done for the season?
Well, I mean, it's sort of a triple blow, and I wrote a column about this at the beginning of the week. People can check out dailymemphian.com, but it's a big short-term blow for the Grizzlies. It's a potential like long-term issue for the Grizzlies, and it's a big blow for Brandon Clarke, who lost a year coming back from this torn Achilles and has come back in really good form. He's not everything he was before, but he's been a highly effective player, and now he has to come back from what appears to be a second major lower body injury. It's I think the Achilles was the left and this is the right knee. Um, and the Grizzlies have not announced a course of treatment, so it's not clear yet whether this is going to be a surgical situation or not. it's the kind of injury that often is a surgical situation. You don't want to assume that, but that is pretty common with this. And if that were the case, like that might cost him most of not all of next season if that's the course of treatment. And maybe it's not. But so there's all three of those elements to it. The short term element, which is the thing that's obviously most pressing, is it really hampers them in terms of the playoffs because there's a chance that they have these two young centers who've never played the playoffs, and Zach Edey and J Hub. J Hub is not as young, but in basketball, NBA game terms, he is. Neither of them have ever played playoff basketball. They are both players who are susceptible to getting attacked defensively. The kind of players who might, be deemed quote unquote unplayable in certain matchups in playoff basketball. Well, if you had Brandon Clarke, you could roll into a playoff series and not have to play either of those guys if you don't want to, if you're not comfortable with it. Because you can play a Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clarke, Santi Aldama front court rotation and soak up all 96 minutes of your front court minutes with those three guys. And now you can't do that. And so not having Brandon Clarke, I think lowers your ceiling in terms of your best playoff lineups, but it also lowers your floor because you may be forced into either playing some guys who are going to struggle defensively or having to play super small. So I think it's a real big blow to the playoff rotations and potential playoff lineups.
Yeah, and it obviously hurts. And I'm glad you made note of the fact that it's a right knee versus the
Yep.
left knee, because if you can remember, like there was a stretch earlier in the season, Brandon coming off of obviously he played towards the end of last year, but that was really limited. That was coming back from the Achilles, but like earlier this season, there was a stretch where he didn't play as well, and then December rolled along and he started playing a lot better. And when I ended up talking to him about it, he was like, sometimes when you have these Achilles injuries and you're building your strength back, you end up using other muscles and you have to deal with sort of nagging injury
Right.
stuff in other parts of the leg. And that was going on in the knee. The problem is that was the left knee, and now this is the right knee, which I think is bad news, right? Like you
Yeah.
almost hope that this was more just like the same thing, but it's not. And so, it's a big blow for all the reasons you pointed out. And just honestly, like the versatility, the skills that he brings, like all that's obvious, but just the fact that he's one of the few players that's actually done it in a playoff series and performed well,
Well,
that hurts
yeah.
too.
If you
Just
if
having
you
that
look
around.
if you look at the roster and ask who do you believe in playoff basketball, Brandon Clarke was going to be the fourth guy you mentioned. Well, like Santi Aldama has probably been the fourth best player overall over the course of the season, but Brandon Clarke's got more of a track record in playoff basketball than Santi Aldama does. He has been the only playoff series this team has won in this era against the Timberwolves in the first round a few years ago. Brandon Clarke was huge in that series. And so, this is a team that's got, after the top three guys, it's got a lot of young guys, a lot of guys who have not played playoff basketball at a high level. And there are a lot of question marks, and you can't play. It's not a 3-on-3 tournament. And so, like, Brandon Clarke's just a huge loss in terms of, experience, in terms of lineup versatility, in terms of your defense, which has been a huge problem, since the trade deadline. So, yeah, it's a major loss.
Um, Part of the reason why the second half against the Jazz was so encouraging was because the players that are going to replace Brandon Clarke played well in that game, and that was Edey and Huff. And it's interesting too because they are all so different. Like every player now that the Grizzlies are going to put out in the front court, they were already different, but it felt like Brandon Clarke was a little bit of a connector there. And now it feels like the Grizzlies are going to be all finesse or all power, because you're not, I just don't see them playing a lot of Edey and then one of the other combinations of guys. Maybe you can play some Edey and Aldama, but once you get to the postseason, you're going to have Jaren out there as much as possible.
Right.
And it's just Edey and Huff are so they just contrast so heavily. It feels like when you watch them play, it's going to be really interesting to see how they make it work. But it was a good sign, and again, it was against a bad Utah team that's not trying to win at the moment. I definitely get that, but it's still encouraging to see those two guys play well and both do what they can bring to the table well. And for Edey, that's going to be offensive rebounding, some of the stuff around the basket. And he stepped out and hit a couple threes. But for Huff, that's going to be this more of the space the floor. And a little bit better foot speed, although, that's certainly a big loss for the Grizzlies without Brandon Clarke.
I do think a few things sort of touch on with that. One is that we haven't mentioned, like they did do a starting lineup change over the course of this
Hmm.
road trip,
Yep.
and moving Santi Aldama into the starting lineup. And the fact that they stuck with that, I think they did that in the Clippers game, and the fact that they stuck with that again in the Utah game with Walker Kessler on the floor. So they made this change with two back-to-back games against big centers. And to me, it's pretty clear this was not some matchup adjustment thing. This is what we're going to do in the playoffs, so let's start doing it now. And I'd been waiting for that for a while. I think the Santi Aldama and the Jaren Jackson Jr. injuries they both have experienced earlier in the month probably delayed what the team was going to would have maybe already done. So they made that change. In terms of the regular season, it makes it sort of an odd rotation because they played Huff and Edey both off the bench in these games, and those guys don't play together. And so it's a little cumbersome to do a rotation where your third and fourth bigs don't play together when they're coming off the bench. They sort of made that work. I sort of feel like when playoffs come, I doubt you see Edey and Huff both playing double digit minutes in a game. I think it's going to be who do we believe in more in terms of how they played down the stretch and in terms of what the matchup of this particular series is. So it almost feels like to me, Edey and Huff are both sort of out there, sort of auditioning a little bit for the third big role in a tighter playoff rotation.
There's a reason they had Gigi go play in the G League, but I don't know. It's size. It's size that can move, and as rough as it's been defensively for him this year, I just wonder if it's worth. I know we're done. We should be done experimenting, and I've been one of the people complaining about it, but
Well,
I wonder if it's worth one more run out there. Just to come on, Gigi. Let's see what you got on defense. Let's try. I don't
well,
know.
I think the Brandon Clarke injury might change the thinking on that
Yeah.
because if you have Brandon Clarke, there's less of a urge I think to do that. But the reality is, Gigi Jackson will be on the playoff roster. Like he's a main roster player. He's going to be on the roster. Like Cam Spencer won't be available to play in the playoffs unless something changes. Gigi Jackson will. So the fact that he'll be on the playoff roster and now you've lost some size and athleticism in Brandon Clarke, it does sort of suggest that and there's only 10 games left, that at some point between now and the end of the regular season, they should probably get Gigi back on the main roster and throw him out there in a game and see if his defensive focus it looks any better, because he is going to be on the playoff roster and you do have a limit of size and athleticism, and you may be in a series where you're going to throw him out there and try to see if he can change something in a series or in a game. And so I think you're probably right about that.
There's a video I want to talk about, but first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
Chris, did you see the video of Desmond Bane and Santi Aldama getting into it during the Jazz game?
I did, and in the absence, we don't know anything more about that right now than what we've seen on the video.
Right.
But so in the absence of more clear context, this maybe this will be proven wrong because I'm just you're just reading you're interpreting a video. I had generally a positive takeaway from it.
Yeah, me too. I was going to get to that.
Which is like, yeah, I mean, they should be mad about playing poorly, and they should be holding each other accountable for stuff. And this team has been. I've used the word casual a lot in the last few weeks. I feel like there's been too many games, especially in the first half of games, where they've been too casual, and that Utah game was like that too. Like they just weren't playing with defensive urgency, and the Jazz are getting open looks, and then they're draining the open looks, and then they have confidence as the team, and it's a problem. And the Grizzlies picked up their urgency over the course of the game. And I don't know what specifically that argument was about, but I suspect it was just an expression of frustration over team play and wanting the team to pick up the intensity, and that carried over to the sideline. And if that's what it was about, then I think it was a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think that the fact that they are showing some fire in the game is is a good thing. The fact that it came from Desmond Bain, that Bain was a part of it, to me, I just don't see him as the type. And again, we don't have the context of it yet, but like I don't see him as the type of player that's going to be arguing about something trivial like during the like. I'm sure that was basketball. That had something to do with basketball. Um, and
He's probably. Would you agree that if there's one guy who's sort of a team leader, it's probably Desmond Bain?
yes, if you're putting the
Because
captain hat on or the C on a
yeah,
jersey, you might be putting it on. Yeah, and I agree. And like let's talk a little bit about let's break down some personalities here. If there's
okay,
any player that has a short fuse on the team, it's Santi, right? Like that's Santi is a wearer his emotions on his sleeve a little bit more than other players type of guy. He's the type that'll say it out loud to the media, which we've seen him do a few times over the last couple seasons. He had that the thing where he said, team isn't playing hard enough, we're content, blah blah blah. Right before he had his injury. And so like I can foresee situations in which Santi Aldama and sort of his fiery attitude might tick somebody off over the course of a basketball game. But guess what? Some of that's healthy, right?
yep.
Having it be a little uncomfortable is healthy. And so I think that I again think, and Bane is usually the very cool-headed but fiery when he gets on the court. Um, so there is some contrast, I guess, between their personalities, but I liked the fact that it looked like they really cared. I'd rather them be arguing because it's not going well than to sit there on the bench and look glum the whole second half. Like that, I'd rather have what we got on tape on Tuesday.
And I guess it's not clear. Is it clear when that happened? It looks like it was in the second half because Jared is not there on the bench. So it's after he'd gone to the locker room. But I assume it's probably soon after that. That's probably not happening when they're up 30 in the middle of the fourth quarter. It's probably on the way to getting that lead, right? It's because they were down one at halftime. So it was coming out in the second half, and the team was picking up its intensity. And I'm guessing that happened sometime in the third quarter, maybe soon after Jaron went out. That's just context clues, but that seems likely to me.
If you were to tell me, if I were to ask you, like, there's two players that just got into it during the game for the Grizzlies, who do you think is involved? I think my first guess would have been Santi, right? Like, let me,
Right.
and like, I think that's just, and like, that's not I don't mean that in a negative connotation at all towards Santi. That's just the way he plays. He's just emotional with the way he plays. So, yeah, I mean, listen, this isn't the first time two guys have yelled at each other on the bench. It's just that this one was on video, right?
Right.
I think that's pretty normal in the context of basketball. Okay. So I also wanted to ask just the way that second half went against Utah. I know that again, it's against a team that's tanking, that's not trying to win, but it was a massacre. Um, did it make you feel better in any way about the current state of the team? I mean, I think the manner in which they won was notable, but I don't know if it's enough to make you really feel better.
I mean, only slightly, but I mean, one of the things that jumped out to me, and I was interested in this going into the game, and for this reason. And so maybe I'm sort of seeing what I want to see a little bit, or not even that. It's still an open question to me. Um, that was the best game Vince Williams has played probably since he's come back from the ankle. It was also 3 days rest. And I was really interested to see what he was going to look like because that's the longest rest I think they've had since then. I was really interested to see what he was going to look like with the extra rest. And so are those things related? Is the extra rest part of why he sort of played better? I know it's against Utah, but they played against Utah like 2 weeks before or whatever, and won the game, and he didn't look as good. And so I wonder if the extra rest helped him. And if that is the case, is that just a one game thing? And now you get back into a normal season flow and he's going to look the same? Or is there any way that like the little bit extra rest sort of actually aided the healing process a little bit in a way that even in a small way might be more permanent? I think the Vince that they got in that game, and he didn't need to score 15 points every night, but just the fact that he was like solid on both ends of the floor and contributing to winning on both ends of the floor, soaking up 20 plus minutes, they really need that.
Yeah, I think I'm a little guilty of just deciding Vince Williams' performance whether or not the shots go in. Like I think that that's sort of been part of it. Like this season, the shot has not been as consistent as it was last year, and he's missed a lot of threes, and there's been a lot of games where he didn't really play well offensively, but he still is sort of giving it on the defensive end the way that you would hope. But those seem to slip past you when he's not putting up the 15
Well,
points a
I'll
game like he
say
did last
I'll say this, and this is on the record, right? At halftime of that game, they were up one or down one. They were down one because Utah had shot the end. They're down one at the half, and he has 5 points. I think he was 1 or 2 from three at that point. He only had 5 points at the half. But I posted on Blue Sky like halftime reactions. One of them was, "This is the best Vince has looked in a long time." So I don't think it's just about him making shots.
year.
I think he looked better. He looked more solid to me. No, he didn't look like the peak version of last year. I mean, he had no steals in that game. He had no blocks. He did not look as dynamic athletically, but I did think he looked a lot better and was just playing more solid basketball outside of the scoring in that game than I think he had been doing since he's come back from the ankle.
Yeah, no, I certainly suspect that was the case. I'm just more talking personally. Like, I don't know. When he's not making shots, it's harder for me. Like, I'm not. I guess I'm not as strongly attached to Vince Williams the way you've hitched your wagon to the Vince Williams train. So I don't. I feel like yeah, that was one of his best games, and the shots went in, and so that's really the type of game where I'm like, oh wow, I noticed Vince maybe a little bit more than I typically do. Um, but and then I think the other player here is Scotty, who
Yes.
continues to play really well, and this is a guy that was out of the rotation earlier this year, and it has gone through waves where his shot hasn't been falling, and has still made himself a virtual lock, in my opinion, to now play key minutes in the playoffs for the Grizzlies because he just does so much. And I think that there's an element to his game that we loved about Vince last year, which is like even if the Grizzlies like I just love the chaotic energy that he brings because a team that sleepwalks as much as the Grizzlies have done so over the last few months, especially defensive or last month, especially defensively. Like to have somebody to inject some level of chaos and just, disorder, honestly, I think is really important to this team. And so, yeah, I just view him now. He's definitely going to be playing key minutes in the playoffs. I don't think there's any way he's not at this point.
I've been wanting him to get back into the mix for a few weeks. And I go back and I made this observation after the game. I go back to the game the last time they played OKC. It's where we're recording now. They're playing OKC tonight, Thursday night, as we record. The last time that the Grizzlies played OKC was, I'm going back to find it. It was March 5th, so earlier in the month. And at that point, that's when sort of around where Pippen had sort of fallen out of the mix as a regular every game rotation player. And he had a good game in that game. He had 15 points that game, 6-9 shooting, played 21 minutes, 3 steals. And I just remember watching that game and thinking he looked like he belonged and he looked like he belonged in that game in terms of the athleticism and in terms of the competitiveness. Because the Thunder is a team where like everyone's athletic and everyone defends and it comes at you in waves. And like they're guys in like I'm not saying Pippen's better than Luke Kennard. I'm not saying he'll be better in the playoffs, but Luke Kennard looked like he struggled a little bit in that game athletically. Pippen didn't. Like Pippen was there for it. He could hang. And I remember watching that game and thinking, this is a guy who's like sort of built for playoff basketball in the sense of you can throw him out there and he'll defend and he's going to be competitive. Now, is he going to always make shots? Is he not going to make turnovers? The issue with Scottie Pippen this year, earlier in the season, has been that he was turnover prone and the team's offense tended to perform worse, especially when he was at point guard. That has been less of the case since he's gotten back into the mix. He had actually 10 assists and 0 turnovers against the Jazz. But his turnover rate has been down. I think he's playing with a lot of confidence. He is making threes right now, and that'll fluctuate. But like defense plays every night. And athleticism, if you're healthy, plays every night. And that's why I've always liked guys like this. Vince Williams last year when he was healthy was like this. DeAnthony Melton was like that. Cal Anderson in his own way, slow-mo but athletic in his own way, was sort of like that. The guys who are competitive and athletic and play defense, to me, you can just depend on that every night. Like shots come, shots go. But guys who get after it on defense, like you can put a guy out there and you can believe you're going to get that. And that's why I felt he needed to be back in the mix. And I'm very happy to see he's back in the mix and playing well.
I am not sure for certain that the Grizzlies' pace has been able to quote unquote wear down other teams
right
in the course of a game. Like I'm not 100% sure of that. I feel like with pretty strong certainty, at least Scottie Pippen Jr. is making the other team's best perimeter player work. And I think there's something that is a positive about, like, if you, with his ball pressure and just the way he makes the easy things difficult, I feel like that's a big advantage that the Grizzlies should use. And like, to me, he does make the other team work.
So
and it is an opportunity to wear them down a little bit.
It's interesting you make this point, because this relates to something, and I had thought about it. I read yesterday that I think is highly relevant to the Grizzlies, even though it does not mention the Memphis Grizzlies. And this is a piece that Michael Pena, who writes for The Ringer, he did a piece, and I can't remember how it's framed, but it's like, like 8 different observations as we head to the playoffs, and one of these kind of big picture kind of things with different components, right? And one of the, and it's highly specific stuff. And one of them is about the Oklahoma City Thunder's 3-point defense. And he makes the point that if you dig into the numbers statistically, Oklahoma City gives up a pretty heavy percentage of open threes, but that teams shoot. So in terms of volume of shots, they give up a heavy percentage of open threes, but teams shoot a low percentage of those open threes against the Thunder, right? So teams are getting a lot of open threes, but they're missing them. And he sort of speculated about, how does that happen? Like, is that just variance? Is that just random? And his theory, which I believe in, is that the defensive intensity that Oklahoma City plays with sort of wears teams down and gets them second guessing and gets them uncomfortable. And over the course of the game, you're sort of uncomfortable enough that it affects your shot even when you have open shots. I buy that completely, and I think that relates to the Grizzlies, because teams are making the open shots against the Grizzlies, and I think it's partly because they're so comfortable, because the Grizzlies are not getting into teams defensively and making them uncomfortable. They're not physical enough, and that lets teams get into a comfort zone, and that's why you look up, it's like every night, it's like, how are these teams shooting so well? How are they making all these shots? Like, guys don't even shoot this well in warm-ups, and they're making all these shots against the Grizzlies. I totally buy this, and I think it's probably right. And Pippen's a guy, to your point, who will make people uncomfortable because he will get into them defensively. And I think this Grizzlies roster right now does not have enough of that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And like, maybe anyone but Shea, who scores with such ease, like, is a good example. But like, 20 minutes of Pippen bugging the hell out of him, trying to bring the ball up the court is an exhausting thing to have to deal with. And the Grizzlies should absolutely make whoever they might get in the playoffs, Anthony Edwards or Luke or whoever it might be, make them have to deal with that. I think that's a useful tool.
If you go back and watch that Utah game, they're down, like, I think the Grizzlies were down 14 at one point in the first half, and Utah's just making every three, right? They got back in the game. In fact, they took the lead, and then Utah hit the last shot and went up one, right? So Grizzlies took the lead and went back up one, then Utah hit the shot at the end, and Utah's up one at the half. But the lineup that got the Grizzlies, that turned that game around and that got the Grizzlies back in the game, it was a lineup of Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson, your two best players, surrounded by Scottie Pippen, Jalen Wells, and Vince Williams. And it was a small lineup, but it was 3 dudes who played defense with your two best players, right? I feel like the Grizzlies probably have to lean into stuff like that more. Like, Santi needs to play because Santi's so good, and like, you don't have enough bigs. But generally speaking, especially when you get into the playoffs, you want your shots to be going to John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson. You need people on the floor with those guys who play defense. And to me, this Grizzlies team has just lost too much of its. And part of it may be, you can relate it to coaching, you can relate it to roster. I think these things are both relevant. but it just doesn't have enough defensive intensity on the roster and or on the floor lately.
I wanted to save some time to talk about the rest of the West, but real quick, has Santi's had a very interesting season, by the way.
Yes.
Because like earlier in the year, we were like, "Whoa, this could be the Santi breakout. Like this could be what everybody's really been waiting for." There were some big time point explosions, whatever. Injuries have happened. The slow stretch for the Grizzlies happened. I remember like they were players on the team campaigning back in December, like six man of the year, Santi Aldama. Well, that's changed. Um, has the way that the season gone affected at all how you view his off season that is to come?
Um, I mean, no, I mean the way the season's gone, I he fell out of the 6 man conversation mostly because he missed the 5 or 6 games with the calf, and now he's starting, and that's sort of. I think he was a top 5 guy in 6 man, like before all that. It hasn't really been about his play; it's been about his absence of play, and then the way he's been used since he's come back. Maybe people aren't thinking of him quite that way anymore. I think I think Santi's really good, and I think the Grizzlies should use their restricted their matching rights and restricted free agency to the leverage that provides to make sure they get him back and to try to get him back on the best deal that they can. But he's a 7 footer. I think he may be legitimately a 7 footer, 6'11", 7 footer, who can dribble, pass, and shoot, and like can play above the rim. Like he just got a lot of pop to his game, and there aren't a lot of guys like that. And the Grizzlies sort of have let a lot of talent sort of slip away, and that's one that they really shouldn't let slip away. And I know, especially now with Brandon Clarke, like you don't know if he's going to be good to go going into next season. I think Santi's really important, and I think now that he's going to be starting with Jaren, we'll see. The playoffs will be interesting for a lot of people, but him especially. He's going to be starting in the playoffs, and is he going to rise to the occasion or is he going to fade? I think that will impact. I think that his playoff performance may impact the way the team and the league feels about him going into the summer more than what he's done in the regular season, honestly. But I have pretty high feelings on pretty high estimation of Santi, I think.
Just 24 years old still, Santi
Yeah.
Aldama. So young. I mean, it's easy to forget because he's been in the league for a while now, but very young. So still has potential to get better there. Okay, real quick before we get out of here, let's just take a look at the West. The Grizzlies, by the way, not the only team that's been dealing with struggles. The Lakers survived last night. They went on a buzzer beater by LeBron James. But as things currently stand, Memphis in fifth at 44 and 28, tied with the Lakers 44 and 28, the Nuggets 46 and 28, the Clippers 41 and 31, the Warriors 41 and 31, Minnesota in eighth at 41 and 32. So a huge jumble, but the Grizzlies have a 3 game lead over the 6th spot, the 7th spot, and the 8th spot. How are we
And
feeling about the chances to avoid the play in?
I feel good about the chances to avoid the play in. I mean, 3 games is a lot to lose with 10 to go. And they'd have to lose it to two teams, right? They're in fifth. So in order to fall out of the top 6, 2 of those teams, the Clippers, Warriors, and Wolves, 2 of those 3 teams would have to pass the Grizzlies, which means 2 teams would have to make up at least 3 games in the standings with 10 games to go. The odds of that are slim. Like I'm not saying it can't happen. Like the Grizzlies could go like 2-8, and those teams could go 7-3, or I mean, it could happen, but it doesn't seem likely to me. I think the Grizzlies are going to be in the top 6. It would be pretty surprising if they weren't. And then it's a matter of like how high are you going to be, and is it a matter of just being as high as possible, or is it a matter of playoff matchup? I mean, it's kind of hard to say at this point. Honestly, the most likely scenario seems to be the one that's already looking at us right now, which is some kind of 4-5 matchup with the Lakers. I don't think either of us would look forward to that necessarily, but it seems like that could easily happen. I think it's unlikely the Grizzlies fall lower than 5. It may be unlikely that they rise, but like the Lakers have not been so great, so I could see them being 4 or 5 or even 3. But I would say the Grizzlies in the 4-5 game seems pretty likely right now.
I should know this. Is the tiebreaker decided between Memphis and the Lakers? Or is that 2-1 right
Well,
now with one to go?
I think it's 2-1. Well, they play on Saturday, and I think the Lakers have won two to the Grizzlies one. I think that's right. And so I think if the Grizzlies win on Saturday, they would tie the season series. I think that's right. I don't have that in front of me, but I believe
In
that is
which case,
accurate.
we go to what? To
Uh,
Western Conference.
conference record, which the Lakers are probably going to have the better conference record. So more than likely, the Lakers will have a tiebreaker head to head with the Grizzlies. I think. Although,
We're
well,
not
no,
sure. We're not sure
well,
on
that,
that.
well, no,
Let's
no,
reserve.
I think they will because it could be that it's division winner trumps, but the Rockets are
Yes.
going to win the division, and so the Grizzlies aren't going to have a division winner aspect to it. So I think more than likely the
But
Lakers will
wouldn't
have
the
a
Lakers
tiebreaker
wouldn't win?
advantage.
The Lakers win the division?
They might, but the Grizzlies won't. Is what I'm saying. So the Lakers right now, if the season ended today, the Lakers would win the Pacific, and the Grizzlies would not win the Southwest.
Ah, correct. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right there. Yeah, it would be Los Angeles. Um, so yeah, that's not one I would be thrilled. And I got to be honest, like 2 days ago, before the Grizzlies beat the Jazz, and before some of these other pretty surprising results in the West, the Lakers have lost some stunners, and so have the Nuggets. Like I did not feel very good about the Grizzlies being able to avoid the play-in. Um,
I was surprised how rampant the sentiment seemed to be that the
Well,
Grizzlies are going to
because
miss the
if you look at
playoffs.
the
The Grizzlies are going to miss the
games,
top
it was
six.
just the remaining schedules though. Like the Grizzlies have the fifth hardest remaining schedule in the rest of the way. They still have a game against Thunder, Celtics, Nuggets, Lakers, Warriors, and Wolves. And I was looking behind saying, wow, look, well, the Warriors and the Wolves both have a chance to make up ground. You go and look at what the Clippers had. They still had five more tanking teams on their schedule. Well, they lost one of they had another bad loss. The Clippers still have, by the way, the Pelicans, the Nets, the Spurs, the Magic, the Mavs twice, and the Kings. Like those are all games that the Clippers could win. Are they going to win all of them? Maybe not. But there's a lot of very winnable games still on the Clippers schedule.
Here's a
So
question.
I don't know.
Here's a question. Let's say it tightens up. Two of these teams aren't going to catch the Grizzlies, but maybe one does, right? Maybe it's the Clippers who would have the tiebreaker against the Grizzlies. Would you rather be, given that the Lakers would probably have a tiebreaker advantage over the Grizzlies, would you rather be the five? Now, you'd probably rather be the four and have home court, but would you rather be the five and be the road team in a first round 4-5 series against the Lakers, or be the six and be the road team in a 3-6 first round series with the Nuggets?
I'd rather play the Lakers.
I think the Nuggets are probably better than the Lakers. The Lakers might not actually be that good, even though they have LeBron and
Right.
Luka. I mean, they have.
Well, here's the thing: the Grizzlies have a problem in the front court now without Brandon Clarke.
Right.
The Lakers aren't really the team that's built
That's
to
right.
take advantage of that.
That's right.
I was
The
actually
issue-
talking. Fun fact: we talked about my dental procedure. I've been at the dentist 3 straight days in a row. My dentist,
wow.
big Grizzlies fan, big Grizzlies fan. He was like shaming me for saying I would prefer the Lakers in the first round. I'm like, he's like, I want to win a playoff series. I'm like, yeah, but which of these teams are you going to pick? You really think the Grizzlies are going to beat Denver or like? What scenario? I guess the best scenario would be Minnesota. That seems like very, very unlikely to happen. Like I kind of feel I don't know. It's like yeah, the Lakers have Luka and LeBron, and that'd be really hard to win. But like I'm not sure which matchup you would truly prefer. It's not
So
clear.
let me play. We're running out of time. I know. Let's play a quick game with you. Let's talk about this. This is something I did a few weeks ago, and I updated it again a few days ago, and I'm going to update it one more time before I write it, probably in the next couple of weeks. If you look at the West playoff teams and only look at lineups that include their projected playoff rotation, lineups that only include players in a projected 9-man playoff rotation. When I did this 3 weeks ago, the Grizzlies actually came out first, very, 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 very slightly over the Thunder. Their numbers change when you take Brandon Clarke out, needless to say, plus adding the last 2 weeks of poor play. What is your guess on the top 4 teams in the West based strictly on net rating of playoff rotation?
Thunder.
Thunder number 1.
Rockets.
Rockets number 6.
Wow. Okay, I would have said Houston. I have another theory, which I'll throw out in a minute. Grizzlies are probably on this list then, if that's
Grizzlies dropped from first to fourth right now on
okay.
this.
Warriors maybe.
Warriors number 2.
And then
Who's number 3?
man, I don't think it's going to be Denver since you're not since this you wouldn't be doing this exercise if it was Denver. Clippers?
It's the Clippers.
Yeah.
And Thunder, Warriors, Clippers. That doesn't surprise me when you think about just if these teams have all their guys. Because we've seen that Clippers team, man. If they have Kawhi and Hart, if they have like everybody there, that team's kind of scary.
Yeah. No, they are. My theory here, by the way, I have a friend who's a big Thunder fan who he's like a kind of a crazy Thunder fan that probably comes up with wild theories that are not true. But he thinks that the Lakers and the Nuggets and some of these teams are losing on purpose because they view the Thunder as vulnerable. I don't think it's the Thunder. I think so. I think these teams do view Houston as vulnerable in the postseason. Yep. And I think they're maybe jockeying to try to get Houston. I wonder if Memphis would even do that. I don't know.
Well, that's one of the reasons I was wondering about the 6-3, right? Because at that point, if you can knock off Denver, Grizzlies, you'd have to get down to like 7, and that's too risky. But if you knock off Denver, then you're instead of playing the Thunder in the second round, you're looking at you maybe the Rockets in the second round, right?
Yeah, I don't know which team. If you had to take one of the grouping behind Oklahoma City all the way. I'll give you a few teams. The most likely teams here. Pick one for a first round matchup. Throw your opinions and your travel stuff out the window. Houston, Denver, LA. Golden State. Of those teams, which team do you think the Grizzlies have the best chance at beating in a playoff series?
Well, the Clippers is the one. The Clippers is who I fear the most. I might take my chances with the Rockets. Honestly, as good as they've been, I know they're second, but I just wonder about their offense bogging down in the playoffs, and I do worry about Steph Curry. Is Steph Curry going to be healthy? That's the other question. If Steph Curry's banged up, then the Warriors are probably my answer. But in the absence of that, I might even go Rockets. I don't know. The Clippers worry me the most.
Yeah, I would go Rockets, I think. By the way, Grizzlies still haven't won a game in California this year, or LA specifically. Did not. They don't have one game. Did not win a game.
They're saving it up for the playoffs, Drew.
You start with 2 games on the road in LA, you're 0-2, the series just feels over before it even starts. Like, I don't want that. I would, although I do think the Lakers might be a better matchup. I think I'm with you. I'd pick Houston. But all right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. Make sure you go check out all our stuff over at the Daily Memphian. It's been a little bit slower recently, but teams headed home, stuff's going to ramp up. I've got a few things I've been working on, so looking forward to everybody getting to read that. And make sure you're checking out all our work. Tiger season's over, but you can go read all the recap and the transfer portal stuff over on the website. So make sure you check that out as well.
There's room on the Arkansas bandwagon.
And Alabama, by the way, which nobody wants to be on. But Arkansas and Alabama both in the Sweet 16, so Chris and I's teams faring pretty well in the NCAA tournament. We'll see who makes it further. All right, that'll do it for us. Until next week, for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.